Let's see here. There we go. The book that I brought is So Great a Cloud of Witnesses, is a book on Hebrews chapter 11. There's 14 chapters. It's actually designed to fit into a Bible class, and I brought 40 books, and they're free of charge. Now, in the past, I've charged for those things. Obviously, it costs me something, but I'm willing to give them away, but it is under one condition, that you read the book. Now, if you bought one of those books years ago, well, I'm sorry, but these are free. Those will cost. I'm thankful for those that have purchased it in the past, and it's helped me pay for these books. But I do once in a while, when in a meeting or in a lectureship, I give some away. And so I chose to bring 40 to give away. And it's the only book that I have that's in print. And I do have a few copies of the one on the church that I wrote, but it's only, like 2 or 3 or something like that. So, but anyway, this is the only one I have in print. And I think you'll find that, in my judgment, this is the best book that I wrote. And I think you'll find that it's very encouraging if you'll read that book, and you'll be uplifted by it. And it was intended to be that way. So, but I do appreciate, if you want them, great, but do read it. That's a pretty small price to pay, I think. I do appreciate this congregation in so many ways. And, I look back over, over the years. This is a 38th year of lectureship. I think there's only been 2 lectures that I had not been in attendance at. And I think maybe the first one, and then one when we were living overseas. But the rest of them I've been in attendance. I have found over the years they have been a great encouragement. And I have to admit, some years are better than others, it appears. And this year has been really supreme. And I think that all the lessons thus far have been good. And we are so blessed to have good men on this lectureship to preach the Word of God to us. I appreciate the way that the questions have been dealt with in context, and the lessons and the applications that are made within the lectures that have been given. I also appreciate Brother Tony, who's going to follow me. And the reason why I appreciate Tony is that he brought 3 apple fritters to me at the beginning of this lectureship. I thought there was only 2 in the box, and I decided I was going to eat them for breakfast this morning. And when I opened it up, there were 3. And I thought, well, I'm going to eat 1.5 and then have 1.5 tomorrow. Well, I ate the 1.5 and decided I can't leave the half, so I ate the other half of that second one. Well, during the break this afternoon, the other one was devoured. So I appreciate it, Tony. But that's not our purpose. We do appreciate you as a listener, and we appreciate your interest in spiritual matters and your interest in this lectureship and the encouragement that you provide for us. And I hope that you'll be encouraged by this lesson. There's probably an untold number of things that truly amaze us. One of the things that amazes me is the universe. I go out into the mountains, or I go to the prairies or the wooded areas, or even the unwooded areas, and I'm amazed at that. And probably most of us have sat under the stars, and like David, we look up into the stars and we are amazed that God loves us, little o' us, here on earth. Psalm 8. And I'm amazed at the grandeur and the splendor of the universe. Another thing that amazes me is the Scriptures. I look at the Bible and it's amazing to me how simple some things are and how complex others are. And yet, all of it communicates to us God's message. And then I'm also amazed at the number of ways that God teaches us. And one of the things that really stand out because of this particular lesson is the use of alphabetic acrostics. Now, I know that that's a big term and probably ought to define that term. An alphabetic acrostic is simply a poem where each letter of the alphabet is used. And probably the most known alphabetic acrostic is Psalm 119. And that's because our Bibles will have the sections of Psalm 119 marked. So you have 8 verses on Aleph, 8 verses on Beth, 8 verses on Gamel, etc., all the way through the Hebrew alphabet. There's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, thus 22 sections in that psalm. And every 8 verses is a section. And what's interesting about that particular alphabetic acrostic, every 8 verses in that section begins with that particular letter. In other words, the first letter of the first 8 verses begin with Aleph, and the second section begins with Beth, etc. There are other alphabetic acrostics within Scripture. If you didn't know, Psalm 25, actually there's several Psalms. If you find a psalm that's 22 verses long, it's a good possibility it is an alphabetic acrostic. Interestingly, sometimes the writers of the book of Psalms made alphabetic acrostics and put 2 letters per verse. And so if you find a psalm that's 11 verses long, a lot of times it is an alphabetic acrostic as well. Another alphabetic acrostic is found in the book of Lamentations. A lot of people don't realize that, but chapters 1 and 2 and chapters 4 and 5 are 22 verses long. Now, it's really kind of interesting. Chapters 1 and 2, they have every letter of the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, and they're in order. In chapter 4, they put, and why Jeremiah did this, I believe Jeremiah was the writer of it, but in chapter 4, he flipped one letter around. I don't know why. I mean, he probably had a reason for that. In chapter 5, or maybe it's the other way around, I don't remember now, but in chapter 5, it's all the letters are there, but they're not in alphabetic order. Now, but every single letter is there. Chapter 3 is the one that I skipped, but it's 66 verses. And so 3 verses per letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Well, if you didn't know, Proverbs chapter 31 verses 10 through, Proverbs 31 verses 10 through 31 is an alphabetic acrostic. And so there have been different ones that have translated this, and kind of interestingly how they do that, but they try to put it in English characters. Now, I don't know, when you take an alphabetic acrostic, and if you've ever learned the language, they don't normally translate and don't normally fit into the other language. And so it doesn't come out in English as far as Proverbs 31 or any other of these alphabetic acrostics, but nonetheless, God used alphabetic acrostics to make this particular purpose. A third thing that really amazes me are women. Yeah. Now, I better leave that before I get in trouble, but there have been some amazing women in my life. I mean, my mother was an amazing lady. There's no doubt about it. My wife is even more amazing. And I have 2 daughters that are amazing ladies. And I have granddaughters that are coming up and a daughter-in-law that is amazing ladies. So, ladies are amazing, but I think I'll just continue on now. Now, with that in mind, we look at Lemuel's advice. Now, the Proverbs 31 is the product of Lemuel, King Lemuel, who wrote these things down for us. Now, most people, and I think there's probably commentaries are divided on this to some degree, but some people believe that Lemuel was just simply another name that Solomon used for himself. And I don't know if that's true or not. I just thought it was a good possibility, and so we kind of think it was Solomon. And if it was Solomon, then it was his mother, and that would be then the words of Bathsheba. And this is her advice to him. Some believe that this was her advice before he got married, and I don't know if that, again, is the case, but, if a guy's looking for a lady, this is a good list of things to look for and to consider. But it is from Lemuel, and so we find in Proverbs 31 and verse 1, he said, the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. So we believe that Lemuel's advice was then these particular things, or the advice given to Lemuel was these particular things. Now, with that in mind, consider an alphabetic acrostic that I'm going to put together that categorizes this poem into 5 areas. Now, obviously, I can't go back to the Hebrew, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense to most of us anyway if I went back to the Hebrew. But I took those different proverbs of this, and really I sat down and tried to categorize them into areas, and then I made it into, or it actually Jody helped me, and made it into an acrostic myself. But we're not going to go from A to Z. We're only going to go from A to E. So you don't have to worry about that. But the first area that I chose is the word assessment. And what we'd have within this proverb is the beginning of it, there's an assessment of this kind of a woman. And then the end of it, there's an assessment of this kind of a woman. And so that's what we are considering. So let's begin with the beginning then. He said, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. Now the first thing, and I want to pick out different concepts found within these texts that help us to understand what he's talking about. Now the word virtuous is the word that I chose to look at in this particular case. Well, that word virtue, or virtuous in this particular case, is normally translated army. Now, put that in there. It's kind of interesting. Who can find an army woman? Well, I don't know about you. That's not the kind of lady that I'm looking for, or well, actually, I'm not looking for one, Jody. Be careful there. But that's not the kind of lady most of us are looking for. So, the fact is, but that's the word that's used there. And the second most common way that particular word is translated is the word man of valor. Now, so who can find a man of valor woman? Well, that really doesn't compute within my mind, and it probably doesn't really with yours. But what he's talking about is a woman of strength. That's what he's dealing with. It's a woman that has power. She has control of her life. Now, it's not talking about an overbearing woman. That's certainly not it. And you look at this particular proverb, it's not talking about an overbearing woman, but it's talking about a lady that has strength in her life to accomplish the deeds that she needs to accomplish within her life. I mean, you ladies have certain responsibilities, and you've got to have the strength to accomplish those responsibilities. And as we go through this particular proverb, we'll find various characteristics that indicate the strength that she has in order to accomplish her purposes in life. Then notice the latter part. He said, for her price is far above rubies. The word price oftentimes refer to the value, and I think that's really the concept here. Now, I remember a few years ago, and I haven't seen this in a while, but it kind of circulates every once in a while through. And I remember that Jody came up with a list of all the things that ladies do and their value. And so, the average person gets $25 an hour, but she is a very talented lady. And so her value is more than $25 an hour. So, let's just push it up to $50 an hour, And she does this and she does that, and she gets up in the middle of the night and she works all day long, and so at the end of the week, this is what she's worth. No, she's worth far more than that. Her worth is far above rubies. Just like the gems are greater value than the normal stones, and so a virtuous woman's value is far greater than the average woman. And so the proverb writer then, Lemuel, then wants us to know how great and how valuable she is. Now it also ends with the assessment as well. So look at verses 31 and 32, or 30 and 31 rather. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Now, in this particular proverb, he said, favor is deceitful. And the word favor is like grace or something of that nature, or various things that a person might do. And we know that people do these various things sometimes out of ulterior motives. And so favor can be deceitful. And then he said, beauty is vain. Well, I know that you ladies like to be beautiful, but we have to remember that beauty doesn't hang around all your life. And all of us should know that. We ought to be more concerned with the inward beauty than the outward beauty. So beauty is vain. But a woman that feareth the Lord, there's the real key right there. It's not referring to a woman that's afraid of the Lord like you're afraid of a bear, or you're afraid of a spider or a bug or whatever it might be. I mean, we've all seen, or a mouse. We've all seen those various things that are said about those kind of things. That's not what he's talking about, that kind of fear. But he's talking about reverence. This is a lady, and her wisdom comes out because she fears the Lord. She has reverence for the Lord. And then he said, give her of the fruit of her hands. In other words, the produce that she makes of her hands. And let her works, those godly works that she does, this woman of wisdom and the works that she does, let them be praised in the gate. The gates is a reference to the gates of a city where judgments are made. And so this judgment then is made about her, and she is to be praised because she's a woman of godliness. Well, then we get to the B, and the B, I chose the word brilliant. And I realize the word brilliant can be used in different ways. And, we talk about ladies that are sharply dressed and makeup on just right, and she glows and she's brilliant in that way. That's not what we're talking about. Or sometimes it's used with reference to the lady that, well, she's like sunshine in the morning, and she's always joyful, she's always glad, but that's not what we're talking about. What we mean by brilliant is the idea of being wise or by being intelligent. That's what we're talking about in this particular thing. So look at verses 26 and 27. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household. She eateth not the bread of idleness. So when she opens her mouth, wisdom then comes out. And we've known ladies like that when she speaks, you want to listen to her. Now, you also know other ladies that are just quite frankly the opposite. I mean, how many of us know some lady, and of course guys can fit into this category too, where they say everything that's on their mind. And you think, well, really, should you be saying these things? And I heard one lady one time, she said, I can say anything I want to say. Well, no, we need to bridle the tongue. And this is the lady that's able to bridle the tongue. This is the lady that when she speaks, she's thought about what she said, what she's going to say, and she speaks out of wisdom. And then as she said, and her tongue is the law of kindness. If you can't say something good, don't say anything at all. That's the rule here. So, it's not always that it's pleasant to listen to, but it's going to be out of the law of kindness in that it's going to be beneficial to us. I mean, the lady might need to discipline her children, but she's going to do it with the law of kindness. She's going to discipline the children, but she's going to say it in such a way that it's to the benefit of the children. So, or somebody else. So it's the law of kindness is in her tongue. What she says is based upon that law of kindness. But then her wisdom is also portrayed in the next verse. She looketh well. There you are. She looketh like with wisdom, looketh well to the ways of her household. Now, we all know that there are certain things that ladies and really, quite frankly, men ought to provide for their household. And she's wise in the way she does that. Now, a lot of times, people of the world and ladies of the world, they think that the provision for the household is nothing more than the physical provisions. And so she makes sure she fixes the meals and she cleans the house and she does those kind of things. But then, so oftentimes, they ignore other needs. But the godly woman, the woman of virtue, the woman of wisdom, she realizes, yes, there's those physical provisions that she needs to provide for, but there's also social provisions, there's also mental provisions, and even more importantly, there's also spiritual provisions. So she provides for her family. She does it well, looking at all the needs of her household, and she provides for those needs of that. And she eateth not the bread of idleness. In other words, she's not lazy, but she is able to accomplish the things that she's desired to do. The next word that I chose is the word committed, the C word. And the virtuous woman is committed, and I was trying to think to myself, well, how can I communicate this idea of committed? Well, you know, the idea of committed is displayed with two basic characteristics. It's the time that a person puts in it and also the effort. That shows true commitment. I mean, isn't that the way it is at work? I mean, that boss is going to look at you and he's going to evaluate. Does he put in the time and does he put in the effort? Well, you know, that's what we're talking about as far as the godly woman is concerned. Does she put in the time and does she put in the effort? Well, she's committed to her husband. And so we look at Proverbs 31 and verses 11 and 12 and notice what it says. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. Now, I think there's several concepts that we ought to look at, and that is the trust that he has in her. In other words, she's being the kind of person that's truly trustworthy, that's a good steward of the things that he provides for the family. He's the provider. He goes out and he labors and he brings in the goods, but she's going to work those things the way it ought to be worked, that he doesn't have to go out and get more spoils or more gain in order to compensate for her spending. No, she works within his gain and takes care of that. She's a good steward of those things. But then the latter part of it is, she will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. Have you ever met a lady that, I mean, it doesn't make any difference what the guy does, everything's wrong? Well, she's not doing him good. But this is the kind of lady that she does her husband good and not evil. And notice what he said there. All the days of her life, she's committed to him. And she's not going to give up. As you well know, in our day and time, too many enter into marriage with no real commitment, no real investment of time, no real investment of energy, no real investment of effort. And in fact, they go into marriage thinking, well, if it just doesn't work out, I'll just divorce them and get somebody else. And so they go through marriages like they go through used cars. And how sad. How truly sad it is. But the godly woman, the woman of wisdom, the God-fearing woman, is a woman that's committed all the days of her life to her husband. She's going to work it out. She's going to do those things necessary in order to keep that marriage together. Then we have her committed to the family as well. And again, just keep in mind the number of times and the number of ways that it really indicates the time she invests as well as the efforts that she invests. So look at verses 13 through 15. She seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. To bring it in takes time and takes effort. And she's willing to put that time and effort into it. She works with it with her hands, and again, time and effort. She's like the merchant ship in that she's willing to go a far way in order to bring things back to her family. And again, time and effort is clearly seen. She's able to bring that food back from afar. And she rises up early while it is yet night. Now, what the old saying that I've always heard is from sun up to sundown, or from dawn to set of sun. That's it. From dawn to set of sun, a woman's work is never done. Now, that's what I used to say to the preacher students. And I think that that's really the case as far as preachers are concerned. You listen to me, preachers? Yeah, from dawn to set of sun, a preacher's work is never done. But it's true with ladies too. Your work is always there. And you're always able to do that work. And so she rises up early in order to count, to account for her time. And she giveth meat. Now, keep in mind, the word meat in the King James English is really the idea of food. She gives food then to her household, and she then provides that food for her household. But then she's also committed to others as well. In the latter part of that verse, we noted that a portion for her maidens. Now there's a question about the maidens there. It could be servant girls or servant ladies that help her in her daily tasks and things like that. Maybe people that she's hired or is taken care of. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. It could be just simply other ladies that she's helping. Young ladies that have come and maybe getting trained by her and taken care of being helped along the way. And she then provides for them as well. But then drop down to verse 20. And he says, she stretcheth out her hands to the poor. Yea, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. Now I know that the way that we think about helping the poor and the needy today is much different than it was in the Mosaic age. And in fact, I think that some of this really ought to be incorporated into helping the poor today. You know, in our day and time, the helping of the poor is just give, and they don't have to do anything for it. And so it is kind of amazing. One brother and sister, they would always plant a garden, and they would plant more than what they needed. And they knew they were planting more. And he was saying to me, he said, there is no telling how many times I've said, if you need some tomatoes, you need some cucumbers or whatever, just come out and harvest it out of my garden, and you can have all that you want. And nobody comes. But if he picks it himself and he takes it to the church building, then it's grabbed up very quick. Well, I think that really displays the attitude that we have about helping the poor in this day and time. You know, the Mosaic law had a system for the poor. And you know what it was? Don't cut the corners of your field. Let the poor come out and harvest those corners. And you know, when a person puts a little work into it, their attitude toward things is a little bit different. Now, you know that, and all of us know that. Well, this is the kind of lady that she helps the poor and the needy. And she's the kind of lady that's committed to helping the poor and the needy. And I don't know whether she just simply gave it away, or I don't know whether she helped somebody else because of different things or different ways, other ways that she could help. But she was concerned about that. And she helped the poor and the needy. The fourth word that I chose is the word dependable. Now, the word dependable can mean basically the same thing as committed, but I really was thinking about with the idea of committed is that time and effort being put into it, as I mentioned already. As far as dependable is concerned, I really mean something to the effect of someone who's reliable and someone who is responsible. And I think those fit with those particular words. And so we're, in this particular point, considering this reliable, this dependable, this responsible lady. So look at verse 21. In verse 21, he said, "She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet." Now, the first thing that I wrote down there, she's not afraid. And I think we could stop right there and make some really valuable points. Now, it's not talking about that she's not going to be afraid of the mouse or the cricket or the frog or whatever it is that's in the house. That has nothing to do with it. But she's willing to sidestep the frog and the mouse and the cricket in order to accomplish her tasks. That's really the point. And so she's not afraid. She's not going to let fear stop her from doing what her responsibilities are. But then you also have the snow. And I can't help it, but maybe it's my time period, Larry. But, you remember the old things that they said about the postman? It doesn't make any difference what the weather is. The mail must go through. Well, the ladies are the same way. It doesn't make any difference what the weather is outside. She's not going to be afraid of the snow. She's not going to be afraid of the winter. She's not going to be afraid of the weather. She's going to accomplish the task that she needs to accomplish. Doesn't that illustrate for us a little bit about the virtuous woman, the woman of strength? That she's not going to let fear stand between her and her responsibilities. She's not going to let the weather stand between her and her responsibility. Now, the latter part of it, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. The word scarlet can be translated a number of different ways, and it can be the idea of red or something. Sometimes people will say purple, but I don't think that's really what he's talking about. I think what he's referring to here, it's a figure of speech that refers to that her household is taken care of well. It's not that they are literally clothed with red or whatever it might be, but that she's taken care of her household well and that they're well cared for. Well, then we go to the next proverb, and that concerns the husband and herself. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothes is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. So the first thing is that, yes, she's concerned with the inward lady, but she's a lady of wisdom. She's a woman of wisdom. And so she's also concerned with herself and her own needs. So she maketh for herself then the coverings of tapestry, and she's clothed in a beautiful way with silk and purple, so she cares for herself. But then notice verse 23 concerning her husband. Her husband is known in the gates. Well, in other words, what this is talking about is she's good for him. And she values him, and she uplifts him. Now, I've heard of too many cases of ladies when they get together and they just start bad-mouthing their husbands and just yap of all the things that they can do or that they can't do or whatever, or that they do. And I know one lady, and invariably, every time she had anything to say about her husband, and I'm talking about to me that I heard, every time she had anything to say about her husband, it was bad. And yet he treated her good. But I couldn't believe that everything she had to say, and I don't believe in the years that I knew them that she ever said one single good thing about her husband. Well, I'm always reminded of this fellow years ago that I knew, and he said, well, it's probably because she got what she deserved. Well, more than likely, that's exactly what was going on. She got what she deserved. Well, this lady, she's good for her husband, and she's the one that speaks well of him. And because of that reason, when he sitteth among the elders of the land, and again, that's a reference with in a town in Judea or a town in Israel, the older men would go to the gate to make judicial decisions. So if you've got a court or you got an ought against a brother or against a person, you would go to those elders and they would listen to you and then make judgments about that. Here it is, partly because of what she does. She's giving him what she ought to be doing to him and giving him and making him look good. And so he sits then among the elders because of that reason. And it makes wise decisions with the elders. Well, it's also the industrious idea as far as dependable is concerned. She considereth a field and buyeth it with the fruit of her hands. She planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. Well, so she then is industrious. She works at it. She looks for a field. She buys the field. She plants the field. She harvests the field. And she does the thing. She girdeth her loins with truth. In other words, she gets to work and strengthen her arms. She has that precept about herself that I'm going to do the work that's necessary. Night, from dawn to set of sun, a woman's work is never done. So she layeth her hand to the spindle, and the latter part, we don't use the word distaff. It could be actually translated spindle, but it's the idea that she takes that spindle and she turns it and she holds it in her hands and stabilizes it. And you could just imagine trying to keep that thing going and stabilizing it at the same time. It shows effort. It shows the responsibility, or shows the kind of person that she's dependable and she keeps it going as she labors. The last letter that I chose is the word, one more proverb. Verse 24, she maketh fine linen and selleth it and delivereth girdles unto the merchants. So basically the same idea of being industrious. Now the word E, and that's the word excellent. And two passages really bring this out. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. Now, strength is that inner strength that she has. The honor is the value of herself. She then is not afraid. She does whatever she needs to do in order to accomplish these things. And then it says that she shall rejoice in time to come. Now, different commentaries say different things about this. Some say, well, when she gets older, she can reflect back on life with joy. I think a good possibility. Others say, well, when she gets older and her kids and her children and her husband praises her for the work that she did when she was younger as a mother and as a wife, she's going to rejoice in that praise that she receives. But I think there's another possibility here. It could be the rejoicing at the time of judgment. Yeah, when she stands before God, having accomplished the work that she was given to do on earth, that she shall rejoice in time to come. Well, then, In verses 28 and 29, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. So her children rise up. Now this is active tense here. It's not something like, well, you have a really good mom. Yeah, I do. That's not. No, the children, they're actively involved in it. They rise up and they call her blessed. And then her husband, he also praises her. And usually most commentaries believe that verse 29 is the way he praises her. And he says, many daughters have done virtuously. Interestingly, same word as in verse 1. Many daughters have done army. Many daughters have done man of valor. Well, no, many daughters have girded up their loins. Many daughters have strengthened themselves to accomplish the work. But then he says, thou excellest them all. The things that you have done are far above what others. And so we look out into the world and we see all the ladies of the world and we see what they accomplish. But then we think about our own spouse. You excellest them all. Well, Lemuel's mother's advice is centered around three basic questions. What is a virtuous woman? What are the characteristics of a virtuous woman? And what is the value of a virtuous woman? And he answered all of those questions. And I think that our alphabetic acrostic, assessment, brilliant, committed, dependable, and excellent, answers those questions as well. And if you didn't realize it, we covered all 22 verses of this text. Every single one. And so it gives us a good overview. But the fact is, and the bottom line is, the world is most certainly highly blessed because of virtuous women. Thank you.